welcome to our Leaders and Managers webinar tonight. I'm delighted to welcome Helen Moylett, an early years expert whose work you all know because you have been working with Development Matters, and together with Nancy Stewart, Helen was the author of the original document, which, as you know only too well, is currently under significant review. And we also have got the Birth to Five Matters document, which we are working on as a complement to the Development Matters. And we will have a report about Birth to Five Matters in a month's time. So welcome. Our theme today is cultural capital. And when this first idea of cultural capital came up for discussion through various work of Ofsted, I was horrified that there was this idea that cultural capital is something that we have to put onto children or we have to give to children. I have always felt that we needed to celebrate the culture that the children bring with them. And I would just like to share with you a tiny little anecdote of what happened to me in my very first week of proper teaching in January 1984. I have taken over a class, and the class always said grace before lunch. I, as a newbie, did not think for 1 minute anything about this, because that's what they always do, so I did it also. There was an Indian girl who also joined in January. She was a newbie too. And at the end of the week, she said to me, "But Barbara, there are many different kinds of God that we need to think about." And I almost fell through the floor because I never thought about what her family would say at the beginning of a meal. I simply took something that was culture of the classroom for granted. And that's in a way what our discussion about cultural capital is about. What it is that the child brings with them, and how can we help them to celebrate it, and how can we share it with the whole of the classroom. Without too much interruption anymore, may I just go ahead, Gwendolyn, and hand over to Helen Moylett. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see all you Montessorians. And I love the title of this webinar, Montessori Musings. I thought that was such a great title because this is reflection space, isn't it? And that's what I'm just going to share my screen now so that we can reflect on cultural capital. Here we go. There we go. Right. Well, I called this Considering Cultural Capital because Montessori Musings was quite alliterative, and this seemed like, a good. And it is something we need to consider, as Barbara's just indicated. So I just thought, well, let's have a quick look at what it actually is before we get into some of this stuff, because Ofsted have got some very weird, well, not weird, but sort of very narrow ideas of what it's all about. Basically, it matters because we all have it. So it's universal. This is a worldwide phenomenon that all of us have and should be interested in. So it's been extensively thought about and written about, not by people particularly in education, although pointing from a sociological sort of point of view into education, particularly by a French sociologist called Bourdieu and other writers on education, and particularly education and social control, with often an emphasis on class issues. It's a complex and contested concept which academics, many of them, have spent many years looking at and thinking about, etc. And it's part of the new Ofsted inspection framework, which begs some questions. But anyway, so what is it? Well, let's just have a look at culture and capital separately and then look at how they come together, because I think that's quite a useful way to think about it, really. Culture is a complex issue in itself. But I mean, this is adapted from a definition which I quite liked really, because it seemed to cover all bases really. It's that collective name for all the behaviour patterns that are socially acquired. So, you know, what we all acquire social behaviour patterns. You know, that's part of being a human. And it's transmitted by means of symbols. Things stand for the culture that we have. We can see it all around us. So, you know, it's like, it says there, distinctive achievements of human groups, like language and tool making and industry and art and science and law and government and all the things that are actually part of culture. And it's things as well as concepts, like, you know, buildings and tools and machines, things that we make as a result of the knowledge and all of those other things that we have. So that's culture. So how does that come together with capital? Well, our normal understanding of capital is often to do with money, isn't it? You know, if we have capital, then we've got something in the bank, basically. You know, it's usually applied to wealth. It usually implies if you've got capital, it's not just that you've got just about enough money in the bank. It means a bit more than that, that you've got some sort of great big wad of money somewhere. I quite like that big bag of money. But it's also, you can use capital if you've got it to get loans for further expansion, you know, of your business, for instance, or because you want to be able to buy something else or whatever. You know, it's helpful to have capital. Now, cultural capital is a sort of notion that Bourdieu came up with to expand those Marxist ideas. I mean, I'm not sure whether Ofsted know that they're building on Karl Marx, but anyway, you know, it's quite a nice irony that they are. But actually, Bourdieu came up with this idea that it wasn't just about economic capital, because Marx talked about, you know, how society was very unfair because those people who had money and social standing and everything that goes with it were much more valued than people who didn't. And there was no particular good reason for that, apart from the fact they had money. So capital was seen as something quite divisive. But Bourdieu expanded those ideas about economic capital into other forms of capital, things that we can exchange for other things, like we do with money. And he talked about three forms of cultural capital: the embodied, the objectified, and the institutionalized. Now, I don't want to get into anything too complicated here, but I just thought it's quite useful to know where we are in all of this, really. And you know, I've tried to simplify this as much as possible, mainly because I'm not a sociologist, and I've done a lot of reading about this because I've been interested in it a long time. But it's, you know, these ideas about who we are as humans are actually not that complicated, because they're as complicated as human beings, which means they're very complicated, but also we can talk about them in language that we can all understand. And the embodied cultural capital exists within us. It's how we present ourselves to the world. You are, even if you're not thinking about it, you are finding out things about me through the way that I speak, what you can see in my background, you know, all sorts of things. I mean, we pick up these things all the time about other people. And the objectified cultural capital is the objects that we own, which say things about us. You know, what sort of house or flat or whatever do we live in? Our cars, all those, they signal to others cultural issues, how we have, you know, the sort of social standing we have, and also our economic capital, you know. And then the institutionalized cultural capital, which is particularly relevant to schools and settings, really, in a way, is what we prioritize in terms of being important in our various institutions. So things like academic qualifications, our standing in our communities, you know, in our church, in our mosque or whatever, you know, I mean, there are so many of those things. But all of these things are about cultural capital. Now, if you think about it, you know, how we present ourselves to the world, all those things that we've learned from our own upbringing, and all the things that we are finding out as we go through life are all contributing to those forms of cultural capital. So we do all have it. And they're interlinked, those forms of cultural capital, with the economic and social capital, because, for instance, if you've got lots of economic capital, you can buy access in this country, and not just in this country, in others as well, to better education, so-called, whether, you know, it's an elite school. You can't go to Eton, for instance, unless you've got loads of money. because it costs a lot of money. You might be able to get a scholarship, but we won't go there. But generally speaking, most people who go to Eton, like various members of our current government, have got rich parents. Now, that's fine. That's the economic capital bit of it. But of course, what happens then in those settings is that you begin to accrue social capital in the form of networks and relationships, and you are educated to possess what we call elite forms of cultural capital that are not open necessarily to everybody, like, for instance, playing polo or enjoying opera. Some of those things that we would maybe class as high culture. And then we exchange that social and cultural capital we've got purely through economic capital, not by being any better than anybody else, for things like high-paying jobs. We've got opportunities to become merchant bankers, for instance, if that's what turns us on in life, etc. To make more money. So capital begets capital. But of course, these are the things that are about society and about class differences and things like that. What I want to talk about now is how all of that relates to our work with young children, because there's no point knowing all of this stuff if it's of no relevance. So there's also this idea about habitus, what Bourdieu calls habitus, having a feel for the game. He was very keen on football, apparently. And he sort of said, if you go to a football match and you are a fan, you have a feel for the game. You know exactly how to behave as a fan, but you also understand what is going on in front of you. Whereas if you go as someone who's never, ever seen football being played, you will not have a clue what to do. You've got to watch and find out from other people how to get a feel for the game, etc. So that's part of it. And if you think about young children as being in the position of beginning to get a feel for the game, whatever the game is, then we have an important role to play in all of this. Now, feel for the game. This is the Nursery World article that you've been given. Now, I didn't ask for Nursery World to put that photo on that article. And interesting, I thought they'd put a picture of children because that's what they always do. But because it was cultural capital, suddenly we get a high culture example. I didn't say, please put a string quartet there, because I rather like them. And this is part of my cultural capital, classical music. It is actually, but I mean, so what? That's not what the article's about. But that's an example of a feel for the game. If I go, I was brought up listening to string quartets and things. I don't make any claim that that is any better than being brought up listening to rap and all sorts of other things. But that was my cultural background. I know how to behave when I go to a classical music concert. I know that one doesn't clap when the music stops necessarily, because it might be that they're just about to go on to something else. Now, this is just having a feel for the game. That's part of that whole business of how we acquire things. But interestingly, that article was illustrated with that picture. Now, just a reminder about that article, it was talking about the draft education inspection framework, which of course now is the inspection framework. Not very much changed, actually, apart from they took out reference to the national curriculum being the source of what they were calling cultural capital, because a lot of people objected. But apart from that, it's much the same. So if we think about that really cultural capital is about all these things, all these beliefs, norms, skills, tastes, knowledge, understandings about the world and status that we acquire through being part of a particular social class and or cultural group. And of course, we can belong to many different cultural groups. We can be part of different communities, etc. So just thinking about, well, what does your cultural capital look and feel like? I've told you that a little bit of my cultural capital is classical music. I'm used to that sort of thing, but there's lots of other things that maybe you would be amazed to find might go with that, because we all have different backgrounds. So, we have to be aware of it, because if this is what we are helping children with, coming to terms with their own cultural capital, what do we know about our own? How do we feel about our own cultural capital? That's one thing as well. And here's someone talking about how they feel about it. This is June O'Sullivan, who some of you will know. She's the chief executive of the London Early Years Foundation. And she's just talking about cultural capital. She and I have had quite a lot of debates about it, actually. They're very interesting. We share some background things. But she talks about two things: being from another country and being from a class background, a working class background. I knew that there was a world beyond me which valued things I didn't even know about. When I arrived in England, those differences were more important, perhaps because I was an outsider. I couldn't always name it, but I realised that how you speak, hold your knife and fork, where you shop, how you name your children, what you did in your spare time, and much more was associated with different values, some more prized than others. However, what took me a while to recognise was that knowing and understanding these subtleties could improve your access and opportunity to education, employment, and success. Now, June, being in charge of lots of nurseries, is very keen that all the children in their nurseries get access to the things they need. And that's where I think there's some debate to be had, isn't there? Because we want to recognise what children bring, but we also want to give them access to things that they haven't had access to, because that's part of education, is finding out things that we don't know about and having new experiences and all of those things. This is what Ofsted says about it. This is the School Inspection Handbook. It's derived from the wording in the national curriculum. It's the essential knowledge that pupils need to be educated citizens. Introducing them to the best that's been thought and said. Now, this came about, this phrase in the national curriculum, when Michael Gove was the Secretary of State for Education. And that's his phrase. He knows what the best is that's been thought and said. I wish I did. You know, how can anyone know what is the best that's been thought and said in the whole wide world? And, you know, I mean, obviously, there's some, we can understand what he's trying to say, I suppose. And then in the early years inspection handbook, we've got cultural capital bracketed with vocabulary, because Ofsted have got an obsession with vocabulary. Not that that's necessary. I mean, you know, I think the vocabulary is important. I'm not sure it always goes with cultural capital. And again, we've got this, it's the essential knowledge that children need to prepare them for future success. I mean, this is the whole school readiness agenda, isn't it? You know, that we're always getting children ready for something which is better coming, instead of appreciating early childhood for really the most important, crucial stage in all of our lives, and actually something to be savoured and valued while it's happening. But anyway, you know, and of course it's the role of the setting to help children experience the awe and wonder of the world, etc. Particularly the most disadvantaged children, we've got that a lot as well. So, I mean, that's the sort of, you know, Ofsted really have got no idea, well, they appear to have no idea that this might be actually quite complicated. They tried to simplify something, which of course is not easily simplified. Well, you know, it's like a lot of things with early years curriculum. I mean, you know, these are some questions which Ofsted HMIs, unfortunately, didn't seem to be asking themselves when they were putting the new framework together. Who decides what's the best that's been thought and said? Does appreciating human thought and creativity start with appreciating your own critical and creative thinking and making? I think it does. And I think what we do with young children, helping them to explore their own creativity, is so important. I mean, it is, you know, how else do we become good learners if we can't be doing all of these things ourselves, not just appreciating what other people who are older and, you know, wiser than we are doing. And do we want everyone to be middle class? I mean, you know, there's also a danger of that, isn't there? I mean, it's a debating point, because, I mean, you know, one of the things that we should be doing as educators is helping children to expand their horizons, etc., etc. But what does that actually mean? And to be inclusive, should we be much more explicit about the differences and richness that children bring, rather than casting them as disadvantaged? I mean, I can still remember very vividly in my early years of teaching, talking to a parent who said, I'm fed up with being told that I'm poor and deprived. I mean, I was working in a very poor area in inner city Manchester, and it was a poor area. There was a lot of poverty. But she said, we're more than that. And I've never forgotten it. I mean, it was one of those conversations that you have that you think, yeah, because I was very naive and very middle class. And I didn't realise that that was, you know, that in some ways we have to be careful, don't we? To value people, we have to really value them rather than just say we do. I love this from the New Zealand curriculum, Te Whāriki, where it says, I come not only with my own strengths, but bring with me the gifts, talents, and strengths of my family, tribe, and ancestors. Now, how wonderful is that? And how far from Ofsted's ideas? I mean, you know, those are just some photographs of different families from around the world, you know, I mean, and of course, you know, we are not monocultural here. you know, there are families from all over the place. There are families with cultural backgrounds that we know nothing of. You know, there are all sorts of things going on. And actually, how do we value that? Because it's difficult. This is not to say it's easy, because it's much easier to talk to someone who has that same habitus or feel for the game as you do. It's a natural thing. But actually, we're not going to be doing that very often in schools and settings. We'll be talking to people from all over the place with different backgrounds and different ideas about what their children should be doing, etc. So I'm just going to share a little bit of video with you now, which I'm sure some of you will have seen. Oh, before we just thinking about these, we're going to look at this video thinking about some of these things, that we all have cultural capital. And that Reggio idea of the rich child with 100 languages, I think, is a really useful one, you know. And children's funds of knowledge. Now, there's been quite a lot of research recently, particularly somebody called Liz Chesworth, who works at Sheffield University, has done a lot of research on looking at the ideas of cultural capital, but how do children show their cultural capital through what she calls funds of knowledge? And I'm going to explore that a little bit with an example of a child and his funds of knowledge in a minute. But just before we do, here's a bit of video from Musical Development Matters.
Yo! 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 Yeah! Yeah! Just me, smooth flow, yo, I'm so rare. Are you with me?
Oh yeah.
Who got the funk? We ain't going
Nowhere.
Are you with me?
Oh yeah.
Who got the funk? We ain't going
Nowhere.
Yeah. One.
Two.
Yo, three. Yeah, 5.
6.
Yeah, 7. 9.
10. Daddy. Yeah, Daddy and Mommy.
Daddy and Mommy.
And Kien.
And Kien.
Kien rapping.
Kien's rapping.
Khalil rapping.
Khalil's rapping.
Khalil rapping. Khalil rapping.
Khalilo rapping. Is that your name? Khalilo?
Khalil rapping.
Yeah.
Khalil rapping.
Right, now, you know, if you haven't seen that before, look on the Musical Development Matters part of the Early Education website. He's 2. And look at what he knows about rhythm, rhyme, counting. You know, his relationship with his dad is great. And, you know, they're enjoying something together. Now, how do we find out about those sort of things? You know, this is more exciting for that child than, you know, presenting something called cultural capital with a picture of a string quartet, isn't it? I mean, you know, this is about, you know, how do we find out about these things? Because, of course, things go on in families. Now, I don't know whether anybody's seen this, but this is from the Pacey website. There's a really nice little video on the Pacey website, which you don't have, I'm not a member, but you can go on there and look at it, talking about cultural capital. And they talk about the importance of the key person and that vital link between the home and the setting, and actually understanding all of this, you know, where the child comes from, what experience they have at home, what's important. We have to make sure that we're having the right sorts of conversations, don't we, about these things in order to recognise the cultural capital that every child has. And I'd just like to, before I finish, talk about that idea of extending experience in a way that is sensitive to the child. And I mean, it might be things like this, you know, going outdoors, having experiences that maybe children don't normally have, or that a lot of children haven't had. But I mean, this is a quote from Ofsted. I love this. There's a picture in a minute of a child enjoying this work of art, not in the way that you would conventionally expect a child to necessarily in an art gallery. And that's one of the things that I think, you know, if we're going to do this, if we're going to say we want to open this world to children, then we have to make those places child friendly. This is not about sedately going around and looking at things as if you are a grown up in the Tate. You know, this is not the same, is it? This is what it means. You know, I am inspired to move by what I can see. I can be that person. This is typical, isn't it, of a child, you know, responding in a bodily way to something that stimulates their interest. So, you know, how do we do that with children? You know, to extend. And this is June talking about, you know, cultural capital's not a list of cultural activities that we ticked off, that would neither deepen children's understanding, strengthen their language, and possibly alienate their parents. So, you know, it's thinking about how do we do this in a really sensitive way to help children get extended experience, because that is part of our role, but also to help them. And I just want to share with you this lovely example from a reception class here. This is David Yates, who's a lovely reception teacher up in Sheffield. And he's just, what I love is that this is about the two-way street that is cultural capital. This is him learning from the children, not the other way round. So this is a learning story that he made about this. You know, this is him, this is Hassan talking about how he keeps his pictures behind the manji when he takes them home. And Mr. Yates does not know what a manji is. So there's a bit of a discussion about this. So the children helped to describe what one looked like and what it was used for. And Zayan, who's there in the middle, came up with an explanation. And then, you know, Hassan shared some more thoughts. It's got 4 legs and it's like a bed and you can sleep on it. Okay, so a bit mystifying. But the next day we discussed the manji again. Now, here's a teacher who didn't just say, oh, yes, you know, I'm acknowledging the child's got a manji at home and he keeps his pictures behind it. He's interested. He's brought his heart as well as his hands and his head to his work. And he's interested. He wants to know more. He wants to learn himself. So we searched the internet and found some information about how a manji is made. We found a video of a man making one and talking about how he did it. He spoke in Urdu, but Sania told us he was explaining how the material was woven and how long it took to make. So, and Hassan was pleased that his and Zayan's description of the manji was accurate after watching the video. So there we go. We've got 2 very happy children. And here's Mum getting involved. So after school this afternoon, Hassan was eager to share the photos of the manji that his mum had taken on her phone. We saw where Hassan keeps his pictures, as he told us, and his mum had taken pictures of the manji from different angles to show that Hassan's description of it was accurate. Now, you know, here's a bit of cultural capital, and this is David writing about this. And I thought this was really lovely because he said, again, the children are leaders of learning, which for them is not just about their competencies in the 7 areas of learning, which Ofsted talk about only. They don't mention the characteristics at all when they talk about cultural capital. And yet, how do we learn, if not through the characteristics? Although areas of learning are important to recognise, it also shows that these individuals are continually using their thinking through the characteristics of effective learning. They are building on their own foundations as citizens in a multicultural society within which they will always be able to call on their wealth of cultural capital and gather even more as they continue to grow and develop. Now, I think that is a lovely example of, you know, us being open to the children. So as you're about to go into breakout rooms, I had a couple of questions that I thought might be useful just to consider. How do we build on and extend children's cultural capital? Because this is not easy stuff, but it's really important. And how do we build on and extend our own? Because I think that that last example was David building on his own cultural capital. He wasn't at all sure what a manji was, and he's now found out. And he's found out more about things that are important to the children. He's very good at doing that. He's very open. And I think we have to be, if we're going to really make an effort to not only extend children's cultural capital, but extend our own. So I'm going to shut up now. And I think Gwendoline's going to do all the necessary technical stuff to get you into breakout rooms. And I'll see you in a bit.
I would like to invite Marion to share just few snippets of what you discussed. Any good ideas of
Well, I'm really glad that you've asked me to keep it short, because I got so interested in what we were talking about. I actually didn't make many notes.
Good.
So I'm really pleased that you've suggested that we are very short. We talked about many of the things I'm sure other people talked about, but we talked about how the children bring ideas in and challenge us with our own understanding. One of the people in my group talked about a child who was exploring goblin sharks. Oh gosh, no idea what that was. So she then researched it so that she had this really lovely and good understanding of something, and of course that extended her understanding of this child's world and what interested them. So that was good. Another person also mentioned celebrating something that's on our doorstep, our own heritage, something that is close by, because we often miss that, don't we? We're looking at the bigger picture. And just to say that somebody was talking about Montessori and how we're all very keen and love it and work with it all the time. And of course, that gives us a really good foundation in understanding similarities and differences and respecting beliefs and values. So that was us.
Perfect. Thank you. Michelle, would you like to share?
We were a bit the same, really. We got quite engrossed and my notes are illegible. But it came down to really, it's quite simple. It's about respecting the child, embracing them and what they bring into the setting, acknowledging what they do, ensuring that we build their confidence so that they can take their own culture and their sense of belonging into any situation and embrace the situation that they're in. So, you know, it came down to it's rooted in their own self, and then that will then give them the confidence to then embrace any culture that they go into. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of our discussion was about, it is simple, and it is about just understanding the skill bases and things that are going on around us. And we had a lovely analogy about somebody being taught how to behave at a football match, and going to a football match all their lives, and then suddenly they go to a cricket match 10 years later. But it's about understanding that they observe what's going on around them and then work out for themselves. So taking us back to our Montessori roots, really, the children, it's as important for the children to observe as it is for us.
Thank you so much. Wendy? Unmute yourself, Wendy.
Sorry, have you got me now? Yes. We had a really good time, and we looked at the 3 areas where we felt that this was very obvious, and AEL, obviously, or practical life, whichever you like, has got so much to offer as the home corner, and lunch times where the children look at the different lunches that the different children have brought in, and then we got carried away with a discussion on what goes into soup and all the different things. But we were so lucky because we had a lovely teacher from Bristol, Pegar, who is Iranian, and she shared the fact that she celebrates the Iranian New Year, and how exciting it is and what a big day it is. And also she has one of her children in the nursery, and there's been so much exchange, and even 1 year on they're still remembering what's happened and they're contributing, and we felt that the whole thing was really a celebration of inclusion, and we felt it was really important to invite parents to become involved, and there were several examples of that. So much the same as everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Suzanne, have we got you on the screen?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to, I think, build on from what everybody else said as well. one of the first things actually that our group spoke about was the impact of COVID, that one can no longer do home visits. It's difficult to get the parents to come in because a lot of exchange was happening by really getting to know the children, their pets, how they live, what they eat, what they speak. And also just thinking about bilingual capital, that, you know, very often parents are sending their children, especially in England, to a school to learn English, and they're not necessarily divulging what the home language is. So it's not always easy for the settings to be able to incorporate that and allow the children that sense of belonging. We also then spoke about being very aware of what we value about culture, or that the adult values about culture, to have an understanding that when somebody comes with something different, that we are, number one, vulnerable enough to say to the parent, I don't know anything about your culture or what you do, and, you know, can you help me to understand, so that I'm also not assuming things from how you look, etc., and then trying to bring that in a patronizing way. And then we ended off actually with a beautiful sum up from one of the people in our group, one of the ladies, who said, what we really need to be is co-researchers with the children. So as the children are learning, we're learning, that we're following the children's leads and interests, and that we do so with humility and allowing the children really to discover from the environment that we create.
What a wonderful message for all of us. Thank you so much. Hannah.
Hello, everyone. We had a very reflective group, and we started off by thinking about our own responsibilities, just thinking about our own bias as teachers. And we talked about the Montessori idea of removing prejudice from your own heart, and thinking about how we could really think about our own unconscious bias when we're with the children. And we talked about the importance of following the child and honing our listening skills. So whether that's through observation or conversations with parents or carers, but how can we really listen to all of the children and the wider community that we come into contact, to get to know the children better. We didn't talk about co-researching, we talked about sustained shared thinking, but that idea of going on a journey with the family and with the children, and just being open and inclusive in our practice, and ways just to build confidence with children as well, thinking about how their own cultural capital develops. So thinking about the festivals, Mary and I both shared stories of how we've missed out on so many festivals already, and only just found out recently from parents of these festivals that because of COVID, we have maybe been in less contact with families. And so it's been really lovely to find out about them, and we're kicking ourselves that we didn't know a bit more about them before the time and had to scrabble about, but just informing ourselves better as well.
That's lovely, thank you. And Lynette and Mel?
Okay, I'll start and then Mel. Well, first of all, we thought about what Helen showed us, you know, with the practitioner there and what he did. And we were thinking about, you know, really identifying that what the families bring and what children bring to us, what they possess, and is valid and significant, and that we should reflect that back to them. So with the child talking about his bed, and that could have just got lost, but it wasn't. It was reflected back. It was reflected back as being significant and important for us to know and understand and be with them. Lots of things came up. We talked about the value of sustained shared thinking, and Mel shared a lovely example of that, of really getting behind and following a child, finding out where they are with things, what they understand, what they can do, and really just tapping in to be aspirational for them. And I think that was the word that kept coming up for us, really, is to be aspirational, to follow them, the importance of the key person from that perspective, and Forest School. That was a really lovely discussion, because, you know, we've got to accept that in a Montessori environment, we're offering our own sort of culture, and in the Forest School open in the, you know, in the natural world, children are engaging in that and showing us all what they know and what they like to do free from walls was a lovely thing that was said there, and that gives us so much to go with and to be aspirational for children, just following, you know, being with them and following them. Mel, have I forgotten something? I'm sure I have. I think that was basically what we touched on.
I think the thing that we actually probably said most strongly in that was that we felt as Montessori practitioners anyway, that there was this sort of struggle between the fact that we were already doing what we believed was enhancing the cultural capital for the child because of their environment and the opportunities that we would have through discussions, and that sometimes the weight of this label and expectations of box ticking might slightly skew that, but that was really the only other thing. So
it's really important.
Brilliant. I'm always so heartened by the richness of the discussions which take place during the breakout rooms. Thank you everybody for contributing. Our group, what I really valued is this idea of listening to the children, really listening so that we get to know them, and also listening to our colleagues that we get to know them, because as practitioners, we have the opportunity to share our values, the riches that we bring, because the children will sense what we value and it will become special for them. So it's like a little gift that we are offering to the children in return. I cannot help but comment on Helen's presentation, and I had kind of little pangs of pain when I saw the reminder that most of the children come from the economically privileged capital families, that we are lucky in some ways because the children already bring lots of extra gifts with them because of their background and the economic position of the parents. But then I thought, all the same, each child makes something unique of the family experience. They bring that unique gift to us, and it is up to us as practitioners to try to create something really beautiful and celebrate it with them in the same way as David celebrated the Indian daybed with the children in his setting. So thank you everybody very much, and now over to Helen.
I just wanted to finish with this poem from Alice Walker, actually, because it, to me, sums up quite a lot about capital and what we value. And it's interesting just listening to Barbara just at the end there, and also the other things that people said about being co-researchers with the children, and also about Forest School and the lack of walls, etc. That actually we need to be careful about how we've been talking this evening, and some of you have been feeding back about, being aware of your own cultural capital, etc. We live in a society which is driven by the market in terms of political ideology anyway. I mean, we have a neoliberal government where the market and what you can buy and sell is all that matters, really. And that is transmitted into education in terms of, it's all about being successful, the next stage, being successful, getting a good job, having loads of money, all of these things. And I love this poem by Alice Walker. I've loved it for years. And I think it says a lot that's really important just to remember. And she says, we alone can devalue gold by not caring if it falls or rises in the marketplace. Wherever there is gold, there is a chain, And if your chain is gold, so much the worse for you. Feathers, shells, and C-shaped stones are all as rare. This could be our revolution, to love what is plentiful as much as what's scarce. So there's a little reflection to end on.
What absolutely beautiful words to finish on, and all these little treasures that children often put in their pocket and then show you as something really, really very special that has been there for a while. Yes, thank you so much, Helen. I would just like to remind you that Hannah Kiani is going to look at the concept of mirrors and windows for Montessori Europe webinar in the beginning of March. And in a way, this will give us an opportunity to continue this conversation about what we give to children and how we take them beyond the classroom into the bigger wide world, and what it really means to be a citizen of the world, or to be connected with the planet and taking our interconnectedness and our responsibilities a little bit further. And I hope you will have a good week. We are taking a week off because when we planned this webinar, we thought that we would have a half term. Well, some of you may have half term, but it will be all kind of merged into the lockdown 3 of sameness. Nonetheless, we are back with book club in 2 weeks' time, and I would all urge you to join us for Montessori Europe Sustainability Day, which now is unfolding to be a really exciting day of theoretical concepts of what the sustainable goals are and what they mean to us, and practical ideas how this can be delivered. So see you all in 2 weeks' time and on the Sustainability Day. Read our newsletters and our blogs just to inspire you further. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good evening. And many thanks, Helen. It was really wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me. It was great to be here.
Thank you.